Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is video 2 of this week's lecture for MAPL, Grassroots Mobilization and Targeting. I am Dave Ebner, and I'm going to be going through this lecture today. So this is part 2 of 3. So the first video that you may have missed or may have enjoyed immensely, or maybe not, was about political science literature, what we know about grassroots mobilization and targeting, especially what we know about direct voter contact, right? Why we canvass, essentially, an argument for why we do grassroots mobilization and targeting in this sort of way. So go ahead and check that out, but you won't be missing anything continuity-wise. Here we're going to be focusing on something different. We'll obviously be on the same sort of theme here. This lecture is going to be focused on how to work with volunteers. So how to use volunteers, how to maximize the role of volunteers on your political campaign. So we'll all have, I think, different levels of political experience coming into this class. Obviously, I have a lot more going forward, but one of the kind of when I look back on my time as a field director, as a field organizer, really like this is what your life becomes about, right? Recruiting, working with, managing volunteers, right? They're the lifeblood of your campaign when it comes to direct voter contact. They're the ones that are going out and knocking doors. They're the ones that are making phone calls. They're the ones that are stuffing envelopes. They're the ones that are helping you distribute signs or whatever, right? These are the people that you need, first of all, to recruit, to maintain, and then to take advantage of, and not necessarily in a bad way, but to make sure you maximize their time. So first of all, you're not wasting their time, right? But second of all, you're not wasting your resources. So what are some ways in which we can do that? So I'll think about this in 3 sort of phases. The first would be like volunteer recruitment. Second would be training, and then the third would be re-recruiting. Or I think this would be like keeping them involved, right? So it's like, yeah, you'll have a lot of people come through that door the first time. This would be like how to get them to come back, how to get them to stay involved, or come back every week, right? Okay, so recruiting volunteers is going to be a little bit difficult, but not necessarily impossible. And I think the first tip here with recruiting volunteers is always ask. Ask frequently. Ask everyone. Ask again and again and again. One of my favorite tips here would be, especially with your, if you have paid staff, but if you have volunteers that are coming back frequently, you can also train them on this, is that one of the most important asks you can make. So a lot of time you're on the phone, right? Calling, or out in the doors, knocking. And a lot of the times you're going to get someone who's like, oh yeah, you got me. Don't bother calling. I'm 100% voting for you. I'm 1,000% going to show up on election day. You don't have to waste any more time or resources knocking on my door, calling me, whatever, right? And some of these people just don't want any more calls, but most of these people are going to be honest, right? They're just saying like, look, you got me. I'm voting for your guy or your girl, and you don't have to worry about me. At that point in the conversation, it's kind of tempting to go like, all right, mark 1, job done, whatever. Nailed it, right? I'm right on the way. One vote closer to winning the election. But really, this is an opportunity at this point when you identify strong supporters, especially if, they're going like, oh yeah, your person's awesome, the other person sucks, they're the worst, whatever. This is the kind of person you want to ask to volunteer. And yeah, most of them are going to say no. Most of them are going to like laugh, or some of them are going to laugh. Some are like, oh no, I don't have the time, or I would never do something like that. No, you got my vote. That's all I can offer, that kind of thing. But in practice, or kind of in my experience, 1 to 10% of so people that you ask will say yes, or at least be interested in volunteering. And this is how you kind of want to train your initial phoners and walkers to do, is just ask them a simple question. I would even add this to your tick sheet, their voter ID, their likelihood or whatever, right? Add this checkbox and ask them if they'd be willing to volunteer for the campaign. And then when those callers turn in their sheets to you, or those walkers come back with their list, you'll have a new list of potential people to call to ask to volunteer. So this is one, hot tip for recruiting is, first of all, ask everybody, but plug this into part of your normal calling and voter ID or voter mobilization routine, is that every strong supporter at least gets a courtesy ask if they would be willing to volunteer. And then what you do is you funnel that list to your field organizers or your upper level campaign staff, and they would call them and ask the official pitch and scheduling to recruit this volunteer. But you can use your phoners and callers to trawl for these potential volunteer targets. The other thing for recruiting is that it kind of gets back to the messages we want to say when we're doing voter contact, but remind that person how important the campaign is, how much you need your help, but most importantly, make it easy for them. Make it easy for them to say yes to you. You can do this in a couple of ways. First is by having a lot of options, time-wise, day-wise, activity-wise. Maybe the person's not ready to come in and knock on doors yet, but they're like, oh, I can come in and stuff some envelopes or put some signs together or whatever. And then you can get them more involved in the campaign if they seem like the kind of person who might be qualified or capable or interested in doing that kind of thing, right? Remind them how important the campaign is, remind them of how awful the opposition is, remind them that this stuff is, but most importantly, make it easy. Because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, sure, I want to help, but maybe in their head, the involvement's too much, or the task is too difficult, or they don't have the training or skills. Remind them and it's easy. And in your volunteer pitches, especially at these kind of initial recruitment ones, just be like, well, we have a lot of things to get involved. We need a lot of help. The most important things we need are calling and canvassing, but put your name on the list and we'll follow up and we'll figure something out. Then when you do that follow up, you'd obviously want to ask, in being recruiting, you want to remind the person that they're helpful, that they can be helpful, but you can assure them that they'll receive the materials and training that they need to go out there and make a difference. How you want to talk to your volunteers is really all you're asking them to be is enthusiastic and available. After that, it's your job as a campaign and as an organizer to make that person useful or to give them something to do or to get them in the office, right? So recruitment, always be recruiting. You should always, whenever you're having conversations with potential current or past volunteers, you always want to be reminding them of the message that it's important, you need their help, the stuff is really easy, and ideally you want to make it fun or enjoyable at the very least. So another way to be recruiting is in how you set up your office, how you interact with your volunteers once they're there. So the big tip here would be design your office space around being accessible and being welcoming for volunteers. So make sure to have things on hand. If you're dealing with a lot of older people, keep that in mind. Put the call stations close to the bathroom or close to the door, right? One or the other, ideally both. But make it easy on them. Try to have a welcoming atmosphere, right? Snacks, a little bit of low music on in the background, but really just having other people in the room looking like they're having a good time. So sometimes there's a tendency to keep your kind of paid staff or professional staff isolated, in the back room, and then to have a separate space for the volunteers. But one of the things I've found most effective is just to have your field organizers or whatever in the same room as the vols so they can develop a sense of camaraderie, but also be there to help address any issues or to kind of help the canvassers or the callers get started, right? So that'll transition into training, and that's one thing you can do is that, first of all, on the phone, you want to indicate that when they come in or whatever, when you're recruiting this person, that they will receive training, and then you want to follow through on that. Because if you tell them they're going to show up and get training and they don't, they'll be pretty skeptical, but they'll feel pretty unprepared and they'll be less likely to come back the next time. So in terms of training, what you want to do is have someone who is experienced doing this train them. And I think that's all you would need to say. You don't necessarily need to have the head field director or the field organizer do the training. You can have other volunteers that have been doing the calling for a long time. And maybe you have some like rock stars that are, in there once a week or twice a week doing calls all the time. They got a great rapport on the phone. What you want to do is have your new recruits watch or shadow or just kind of be trained by these people who are good at it and who've done it a bunch, right? Who can kind of not only help them with the logistics of it, but be there when they have negative experiences or even something like going through their, when you sit down and the first canvasser, it's their first day volunteering, their first 10 numbers don't answer, right? At that point, they're going to get a little bit discouraged. So it's very important to have someone there to keep their spirits up or to remind them that, like, this is a volume play or kind of be encouraging. And that's another thing you can do here in this training is that if you go back to video 1, maybe you can use some of that information, but you want to give your volunteers a little bit of background about why you're asking them to do what you're asking them to do, right? because they're going to come in and have questions like, do these phone calls work? Does door knocking even make a difference, right? I'm just bothering people at their house or whatever. They'll have these concerns, but part of your training is to remind them about the effectiveness of what you're having them do. And as I said, you can use that literature stuff I used before, or you can just kind of have testimonials, right? And whether they're written vignettes or just there's another volunteer in the office that can tell them about some success stories they've had. One important way to both be recruiting and to provide good training is to help them navigate these issues, right? Another thing on training would be you can do stuff in a group. Especially if you have 100 people coming into Canvas on some sort of Sunday, you can do a more kind of like group training where you hand everybody out their information and you instruct from the front of the classroom, like a big lecture, right? But the best training is hands-on. And especially when training canvassers, I don't know what I'm pointing to this time, there's no canvassers on this much thing, but especially when training canvassers, one of the best things to do is just have them shadow one person or an experienced person for those first couple doors to see how it's done. They come out with you, you knock on a couple doors, you show them how to use the sheet, you have a good conversation with someone, and then you kind of send them off on their own and they'll feel much more prepared, much more ready to go, much more like they know what they're doing. But the other thing is that part of the reason people do this is to be part of something bigger than themselves. And if they come in, they talk to one person at the office, it's impersonal, they hand them a packet, they walk out, and they come back sometime later, they don't get a lot of contact from you or the campaign. Yeah, they're going to feel like they did something for democracy or for the candidate maybe, right? But they're not going to feel that camaraderie or being part of a team that will keep them coming back for more, but also motivate them to finish their walk list when they're out there, complete their call sheet when they're in the office. So providing good training will keep them in the field for you and for themselves. And then the last thing I'll touch on here is the last section is re-recruitment. So the hardest thing to do is to get somebody in that door the first time. And once you've accomplished that difficult task, you would much rather not have to do that again. And one way you can prevent yourself from having to do all the arduous work of identifying and recruiting new volunteers is to maximize the volunteers you've already got. So one of the most important things here is to be professional, be recruiting, and develop that camaraderie so that a canvasser who comes in or a caller that comes in will want to come back next week. Maybe they had a good time sitting in the phone room with the other old ladies or the other people making calls, right? You can always hear some funny stuff happen. Some people just have a great kind of like phone rapport and it entertains the other people. So if you have a group of volunteers, you'll develop that camaraderie and they'll want to come back, not because they like calling lists, but because they like hanging out with other people that are doing something important, that are part of the cause that they support. So re-recruitment is kind of a function of these other two things, providing good training and developing and recruiting and kind of like good atmosphere on your campaign will allow you to keep these people invested, right? So you want that caller who comes in to sign up to come back next week. And I think that's what you have to do here too, is that just like in this step here, asking all the time is incredibly important. So is this. Ask, 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 ask. If a person says no, that's fine. Ask them tomorrow. Ask them in 2 hours, right? Ask them the next time a big piece of news drops. Call them back and remind them that something comes in, something is important, it's happening, they need to come in and help volunteer. And the other thing you can do is to kind of like incentivize people. So whether it's having things like little contests, having little prize nights, or maybe just having themed nights around your calls or your canvases. So like you can say, oh, this is parents' night for calling, or this is college students' night for calling. So it's a way to recruit them, but also it's a way to develop that camaraderie and come back. So if you have a group of like-minded people who are coming in each week to do the thing, it's going to work a lot better. Not only are they going to be more likely to come back, but this kind of campaign and this kind of atmosphere that you can develop will make the stuff you're doing more effective, right? So if I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of other callers and I'm super happy to be doing it, that's going to come through on the phone. On the other hand, if I'm just, locked in a closet somewhere, going through a list, nobody's around, it's pretty boring, that's going to come through on the phone too, and that's going to affect your ability to re-recruit and keep these volunteers involved. So I'll sort of wrap up there, but just to summarize, working with volunteers. The most important part is recruitment. What you can do here is develop points and access points and data points within your campaign where you can track, manage, and kind of like build your database of potential callers that you'd want to follow up with. Then provide that recruiting atmosphere in there, but also provide the training that people need. And like I said, this isn't just training on how to use the thing on your phone, right? But give them some background about how this fits into the bigger campaign. Maybe remind them of those numbers, right? Canvassing is 10%. You know, you're 10% likely to change this person's mind by knocking on their door. That kind of stuff helps build in them an idea of what they're doing and motivates them. And then re-recruitment. Once you have people involved in your campaign, do what you can to keep them involved. And it's the same kind of stuff that got them there in the first place. The stuff's important. We need them, but also make it fun. Make it interesting. Develop that camaraderie, or at least that esprit de corps among your volunteers, that they not only know they need to come back and know it's important, but they want to come back and will like to and enjoy it eventually, right? And like I said, this is not to say that making those phone calls itself or knocking on those doors is enjoyable for everybody, right? Not everybody's a weirdo or like me, right? But it can be enjoyable to come to the office and hang out with the other people making those calls and be part of the campaign, even if those listening to a dial tone gets old after a period of time, right? What'll keep people coming back is the people around them, right? So the idea here is, like, these are people, right? We're using people to talk to people. Keep that in mind. This is a really kind of like a social atmosphere, and the stuff around the edges, but building confidence, being recruiting, being nice, being knowledgeable, reminding people that they're important. This is the stuff that will make your volunteer campaign robust and effective in performing direct voter contact and really help you win. All right, I'll wrap up there with video 2. And in video 3, we will talk more about kind of the developing turf, cutting turf, and how to integrate this stuff into the larger part of the campaign. We talked a little bit about it here in terms of, you know, making sure all your calls and all your knocks involve some sort of volunteer ask, but we'll talk a little bit more robustly about what it means to really make direct voter contact an effective part of your campaign.